Hey!
Know that this video will be worse than your grandmother. You know, because grandmothers spoil their grandchildren. You have been warned. So you guys told me about this thing, this tribute to this other thing that tells the story of a large group of people who live in a fabricated reality. Amongst said group of people, there is a certain someone who, through a combination of wit and dumb luck, comes to the realization that all along he has been just a pawn in someone else's game. An interesting decision follows this realization. Should he choose to forget that he ever came by this earth-shattering piece of knowledge? Or should he go for the option that'll put him squarely in the driver's seat of his own destiny? And because there would have not been a story if he had taken the first option, he decides to accept the truth and do something about it, thus becoming a chosen one of sorts. As the chosen one, he must now break through the borders of this fabricated reality and bring its arrogant creators to their knees. And you know what? I'll be talking about this thing you told me about in this video, because I happen to think it is freaking awesome. This thing is called Gamedec, a combatless sci-fi RPG that takes place in a, let's say, dystopian future. And by the way, this is dog shit. Don't watch it. Welcome to Yold Entertainment. My name is Alex, and as you know, it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumping for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today, we have one of those games that is always a delight to review, because everyone that's played it seems to either swear by it or at it. Is it the brain-dislocating sci-fi experience you've been longing for your whole life? Is it a pretentious, disappointing, unfinished mess of a game that could have used 6 more months in the oven? Is it both of these things somehow? Or is the truth, as it is often the case, somewhere in between? Let's find out, shall we? As you know, I rate games according to a system of categories that feel relevant to the genre of the game at hand, and this is an RPG that takes place in a sci-fi futuristic setting. There is no combat and barely any exploration in Gamedec, but you must still create a character to embark upon this futuristic adventure and navigate its conundrums, and I happen to think this is a very important thing, so we'll talk about that first. Gamedec is structured in acts, and for the most part they are self-contained adventures. The good news is that these acts are designed as branching paths of roads and roads not taken, and there's plenty of relevant decisions for you to make. The bad news is that very few of those decisions have any impact in the long run. Some do at least, and I'm fairly happy with that. Gamedec tries to tell you that, lore-wise, there's a very good reason for this lack of impact, although it may very well be a clever little plot device to cover up for the fact that the developers couldn't quite complete the game. But we'll get into that later. Many of the decisions you make in Gamedec depend on the skills you decide to acquire. This means that some doors will open and some others will remain closed depending on who you choose to be in the world, and that's always a good thing in my book, because this generally translates into high quality replay value. I do have a bit of an issue with the game's character progression system though. Gamedec works with a system of aspects, professions, and skills. Aspects function as attributes that allow you to dive deep into professions, and these in turn are like skills in talent trees, and these skills allow you to do some things in special ways. There is no leveling per se in Gamedec. Instead, every time you solve a problem or take a decision, you earn points in the corresponding aspect, and activating skills depends on whether or not you have enough points in the aspects required. But this means that if you solve a certain problem by being bold, daring, and determined, you earn a point in the decisive red aspect, which is the little red fire icon. But if your solution was more empathic, then you earn a point in the social green aspect, the little green heart there. Not bad, I get it, but being the calculating bastard I am, I often took a decision that didn't exactly feel right story-wise because I was all hell-bent on getting that point I needed to unlock that badass skill I was going for. I'm all about opportunity cost. I think that's the ultimate source of good quality replay value. And it's cool when it comes from having limited resources, like limited points to assign when you're creating a character or leveling as it happens in other games. But when your decisions rob you not of story-related consequences, but of the possibility of progressing in the direction you want to go as a character, then I have a bit of an issue. The character creation and leveling system does serve its primary function though. I felt like its buttons and levers allowed me to navigate the game my way. There is however one very important operative issue with this little system of aspects and attributes, and it's that there's no fucking way of knowing what those damn little icons represent when you're creating your character. So you are creating your character and you choose self-direction as your main value. Well, you get 1 little red fire, 3 little yellow light bulbs, 1 blue puzzle piece, and a green heart. And what the hell do any of these little icons represent?
I don't know. Of course not.
And I know what you noobs are thinking. I don't need to be spoon-fed the meaning of these icons. I am a seasoned RPG veteran. Let's see. The red fire must mean strength or something related. The yellow light bulb must be intellect, and the green heart must be constitution? Get out of here, noob.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
So yes, you get to know all about aspects, professions, and the skill system once you have created your character and started the game. Fuck you, game. As for the available character portraits and bodies you can choose from, they all look like people I want to punch, except perhaps a couple from the first row. But in spite of this, I didn't hate the character creation and leveling system in Gamedec. As I said, it serves its purpose. I just wish I had known how it worked from the get-go, and I definitely would have preferred that my character's progress hadn't been wired to my decisions story-wise. Gameplay. So there's only two things you'll be doing in Gamedec: puzzle solving and questing. And though some would disagree, I think that the game does a pretty decent job with both of these things. Puzzles are seamlessly integrated into the questing, and that's something that I can appreciate. Although it takes its sweet little time, Gamedec manages to make you care about your character's predicaments and the world around you, and that can only happen when the game achieves at least some degree of immersion, and I would say Gamedec does so somewhat competently at least. Some people compare it to Disco Elysium though.
You serious?
Anyways, the immersion aspect of the game could have easily gone out the window if its puzzles had been your regular, move these tiles in the right order to open this door kinda deal. Luckily, they weren't. I think that the best puzzles in any game are those that are so subtle, so much a part of what you're doing, that they don't even feel like puzzles. And I'm happy to report that that's the case with puzzles in Gamedec. As for questing, well, I suppose some sort of explanation about the story is needed. You are a Gamedec, a game detective. And what does that mean?
They stole everything, Leonard! Everything!
Are you the roommate?
Yeah, Leonard Hofstetter, what happened?
Your friend here called 911 to report a robbery.
Oh my god, what did they get?
What didn't they get? I got my enchanted weapons, my vicious gladiator armor, my wand of untainted power, and all my gold.
You called the police because someone hacked your World of Warcraft account?
What choice did I have? The mighty Sheldor, level 85 blood elf, hero of the Eastern Kingdoms, has been picked clean like a carcass in the desert sun. Plus the FBI hung up on me.
To make the long story short, a Gamedec is the person Sheldon should have called when his shit got stolen in World of Warcraft, instead of that police officer. But of course, people go on about their gaming a bit differently in the future. And rather than sitting on a chair and primitively operating a controller and watching a TV screen, people lean on couches and wear VR goggles that have the capacity of transporting them to the virtual game world of their choice, so they can fully indulge their darkest side, or experience the thrill of racing crops in the Old West, or live in an ancient fantasy samurai world. Okay, that one's kinda cool. But unlike in World of Warcraft, shit gets serious in these games. People steal vast amounts of money from other people, they cheat on their wives and husbands with online friends, they threaten to kill others, they belong to weird-ass cults. Actually, forget I said anything, it's exactly like World of Warcraft. And that's why Gamedecs are needed. Not in World of Warcraft, although they're kinda needed there too, but in the world of Gamedec, like to solve these crimes that have real-life repercussions and stuff. I have to admit that I wasn't at all thrilled with this premise. This shit's not for me, I thought as I was watching its intro. An intro that felt as though it was desperately trying to come off as cool and edgy. And then I went on to the character creation screen, and well, you already know how I felt about its value systems and its selectable characters. Yes, definitely not for me, I thought. But soon enough I came upon this succession of decision notes that made me feel like I was choosing my own path. This of course piqued my interest, and I decided to endure Gamedec's initial shallow predicaments, occasional cringe, and uninteresting premise. And I'm glad I did. This little guy here played an important part in my decision to stay and play. Questing is interesting through Gamedec's first 2 chapters, even if its premise is nothing stellar. And just as I was getting ready to label Gamedec an okay game, in rode a most unexpected plot twist. Maybe it was just me, but I didn't anticipate the game to go from an interesting story about a goofy online game detective to you're in the Matrix, dude, your whole life is a lie. So the game went from aggressively mediocre to holy shit in a matter of seconds. Just like that, the stakes went through the roof. And if there's one thing that makes questing work in a video game, it's the stakes. We'll get into that later, of course, because much of this has to do with the story. But suffice it to say, I was thrilled. It was not all sunshine and bunnies, of course. Ever so often, Gamedec makes subtle mockery of those who engage in cash grab, farmy, mobile-like games. But at the same time, it forces you to engage in cash grab, farmy, mobile-like game mechanics. Fuck you farming pumpkins in your farm. Fuck you build mechanics in this game world. I found these minigames to be irritating, and I think we could have definitely done without any of them. Still, Gamedec's branching paths and the stakes the story hits you with later on in the game elevate the gameplay in this title above many of its story-based peers. Heck, this location you're looking at is filled with characters and information, and a full-scale investigation you have to carry out. And it is a location you may not even have to go to depending on how you handled the previous investigation. Stuff like this is aces in my book, and it is the type of thing a game gets extra credit for in my estimation. Story and lore. As I've said before, Gamedec goes from aggressively mediocre to holy shit in a snap. Allow me, dear viewer, to regale you with my thoughts on the matter. Gamedec is a game that tackles the theme of playing someone else's game, and that is something that we can all relate to. Sometimes we play someone else's game willingly, sometimes we don't, but worse yet, sometimes we play these games unknowingly. Master manipulators always try their hardest to engineer the game so that its other players aren't even aware they're in it. The single parent who fears to die alone and thus manipulates his last child with guilt.
I did the best I could! What about me?
Can't let that last one leave now, can we?
You're not leaving. You're not leaving!
The boss who makes his employee believe that there's a promotion waiting for him because he wants maximum productivity from the lad.
Now, I know you've been working your tail off for that promotion, but I'm not sure I can even consider making you the senior vice president of sales if I can't trust you. You can trust me. Yeah, now you sound like my wife.
The would-be totalitarian government or corporation who seeks to amass followers by stoking the fires of resentment by whispering in the ears of those who have been stewing in their own external control locus that they are the paladins who are finally going to bring down the evil group that has been raining misery upon the oppressed and marginalized. These are some examples that come to mind when I think of the theme, playing someone else's game, but Gamedec comes packed with a few of its own. The parentless street kids that have become indentured servants to some unscrupulous asshole who has even convinced himself that he's given those kids a better life than they could have ever gotten on their own, by forcing them to play a farmy harvest game to generate a few cents. The naive benefactor who seeks to feel good about herself and becomes trapped in the same manipulator's game. The false prophet who preys on those who suffer. The rich kid's friend who tags along his bolder, more daring, and wealthier friend hoping that some of that will rub onto him. Oh, but unbeknownst to all of them, manipulators and manipulated alike, Blue Whale Interactive, the mad geniuses who created everyone's favorite game worlds, are also the masters of the world they live in, a world everybody foolishly believes to be the real world. The original Matrix movie had an interesting premise, and some seriously awesome symbolism to drive its points home. And it would be a gross understatement to say that Gamedec borrows generously from the original Matrix film. But like Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, follow the path of those who came before you up until the point in which they made a mistake. And where the Matrix took a wrong turn, Gamedec went straight to victory.
How dare you!
So at some point in Gamedec, your character finds out that his or her reality is a fabrication, a matrix of sorts. The world you've been living in is no more real than all those virtual worlds people lose themselves in when they have nothing better to do, and even if they have better things to do. As it turns out, those who have engineered this wicked virtual matrix that you've unknowingly been living in your whole life are all hell-bent on wiping out the entity who made it possible for you to become aware of the existence of the Matrix. To this end, the creators of the Matrix have appointed an entity known as a Jester, an artificial intelligence whose original purpose was to ensure that everyone in the Matrix lives their lives just like they would in an organic world, without ever becoming aware that they are indeed inside a fabricated reality. So at some point in the original Matrix film, Trinity comes to the realization that Neo is the Chosen One.
I'm not afraid anymore. The Oracle told me that I would fall in love and that the man that I loved would be the one. So you see, you can't be dead. You can't be. Because I love you.
And that's when Neo goes from getting his ass kicked by Mr. Smith to cutting through multiple copies of him as though they weren't even there. In Gamedec, coming to the realization that you are the one who can foil the plans of the creators of the Matrix doesn't come with supernatural powers, but it comes with dilemmas and choices.
Yum, 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 yum. Ice cream, strawberry, chocolate
favorite ice cream flavors are always going to be chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. If you don't know that there is stracciatella, gianduja, and Ferrero Rocher flavored ice creams. But once you are aware of the existence of these fabulous flavors, a new dilemma inevitably follows. Should you try any of those fancy flavors? And more importantly, can you afford them? Gamedec hits you with a revelation that you have been playing someone else's game all along, and then it riddles you with the cost that comes attached with this valuable piece of knowledge. What will the son do when he learns that his father has been manipulating him out of fear of dying alone? What will the employee do once he learns that there is no promotion waiting for him and that it has all been a lie? What will the oppressed and marginalized do when they find out that they will be uplifted by these high and mighty paladins of justice, but only if they say, "Aye, sir," and become indentured servants who must now be grateful? Will they all continue to live their lives as they did before it was revealed to them that they were playing someone else's game?
Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing ever happened.
And that is certainly a choice that we have once the curtain has fallen and it's become clear that we have been but a pawn in someone else's game. But do we take this choice and continue to play the game willingly? Or do we pay the cost of stepping out of the game? Do we leave our father and deal with the feeling of guilt and perhaps the economic struggle that ensues? Do we step up to our boss and demand that we get a raise and threaten to leave if we don't? Do we stop waiting for someone else to level the playing field and stand on our own two legs and brave the challenges that lie ahead? This isn't an easy decision because the price to be paid isn't cheap at all. Gamedec is pretty straightforward about this, and it doesn't fuck around at all.
This is another one of the really big realizations I had doing DMT. Some people do DMT and then they start seeing people as NPCs. I've heard that talked about. Like they start seeing people as like, these are not real people. And I did see an elf, kind of like a court jester, and it had like slinky, and it sounds like crackhead shit if you've never done DMT.
I know not to you, but too.
A lot of people have a shared like physical description of what these things look like.
One of my most profound experiences, there was a bunch of court jesters give me the finger.
A common experience, people who meet the elves or the jesters, whatever you want to call them, they have like something to like teach you.
I think sometimes what people do, and what I've certainly done, is you protect yourself from criticism, or you protect yourself from your own analysis of your correct and incorrect thoughts and actions by bullshitting yourself. The aliens, or the whatever they were, the jesters, and they all had the little bells, the little hats with the bells.
Yeah, it's so crazy. They look like little courtyard.
Yeah. Well, they know your bullshit. They know all of your nonsense. They know all of your thoughts. They know, I mean, whatever the fuck they are, whether they're a part of your consciousness or whether these are intelligent entities in another dimension that you're interacting with.
Pay attention to the real world. And if you believe that the elves are real beings that are independent of something created in your own brain due to the DMT, they'll like send you a sign, right? So one of the things in my first trip that they kept telling me was, this is not the end. This is not the end.
And as world-ending as it might seem, leaving that toxic parent or quitting that toxic job won't be the end either. So the court jester knows what you're thinking, and you cannot fool him. Think about that when you're about to make the last decision in Gamedec. The bones of the story in Gamedec are
amazing,
but unfortunately, there's also a lot taken away from it. The writing per se isn't stellar, sometimes it's borderline crude. Some characters seem a little bit too forthcoming about their thoughts and dispositions and are ready to reveal their darkest secrets to you just like that. Some characters come out of nowhere and are presented as big players, but they leave the script just as hastily as they were introduced, and I can't decide if some of the inevitability we experience near the end is a stroke of brilliance or a cop-out. The feeling that the game is undercooked in most other respects makes me lean towards the latter. But then, every time the game crashes, you get this screen from Blue Whale Interactive for you to report the incident. That's some classy fourth wall breaking there, mates. Implying that even you, the player, are living in a reality that has been fabricated by some tech corporation. In spite of all its many flaws, I think Gamedec tries to go where few have gone before with its story. It juggles with its main theme competently and provides a surprising amount of food for thought, and that is way more than can be said of most other games. Companions lore-wise.
There aren't any.
Companions gameplay-wise.
There aren't any.
Secondary mechanics and user experience. There's only two things you do in Gamedec aside from questing. You choose hypotheses that help you solve the game's mysteries, and you check codex entries to see if any of them are useful to solve the puzzle or quest at hand. Both of these things are excellent as concepts, but they are atrociously implemented as game mechanics. I played Gamedec twice, and I am thoroughly convinced that every hypothesis you choose for every mystery in this game will turn out to be correct. That's not how things work, mates. This guy was either assassinated or not assassinated. Both explanations can't be equally valid. This is tremendously disappointing. If choosing the wrong hypothesis had had an impact story-wise, then it would have been mind-blowingly awesome. And I get it. The world around you is an artificial intelligence-generated simulation, and it produces a fitting outcome for all your hypotheses, making all of them correct. But it's still deeply unsatisfying gameplay-wise. As for codex entries, there are a couple of mysteries in the game that are meant to be solved with the information you get from those codex entries. And some of it is actually cool information to have, but these have got to be the worst. And I'm not shitting you here, it's the worst way anyone has ever presented codex entries in a game ever before. First, they are constantly poking your eyes with this exclamation mark every time you learn something new, as though it were some unattended issue of critical importance. It's not. Then there's the fact that the game uses a system of taxonomies to classify their codex entries. Not every codex entry is worth reading, of course, but if you don't check these codex entries constantly, there will be a time when you will come by useful information and you won't rightly know where to find it. Because, first, you can't tell what taxonomy it's been classified by. Second, you cannot sort these entries with your preferred criteria. And third, some of them aren't even marked as viewed when you view them. It also doesn't help that the writing is all over the place in terms of quality. Sometimes it feels like it came out of the script for the original Blade Runner film, and sometimes like it came out of a zoomer's diary. This really dampens the fun factor in Gamedec, and it's a pity because it could have been awesome. Sound effects and mix. The immersion aspect of the game is well accomplished in Gamedec, and I think that the sound might just be the unsung hero here. Most locations, be them real-world places or the many virtual game worlds you visit, felt alive, busy, and real. Some locations are better than others though, and it seems like the more you progress into the game, the less rich the sound becomes. And I don't know if I've been indulging in too many old games recently, but I found the sound mix to be phenomenal in Gamedec. Music. The music is adequate and diverse, but I wasn't impressed with it. I actually had to give it another listen because at the time I sat down to make this review, I couldn't rightly tell if I had liked it. Compared to some of the heavy hitters like the soundtrack in the Shadowrun series, this would be kind of average, but there are a couple of standout tracks that help it snatch a good rating. Voice acting.
There ain't any.
Graphics. I found the diversity of locations to be quite remarkable. There are many in-game game worlds that go from Old West to feudal Japan to modern-day sex districts, as well as some other real-world locations, and all of them look lived in, and that's a key ingredient when it comes to delivering on the immersion end of things. It must be said though, that most of these locations are on the tiny side, and that's like cheating a bit. There's also the Matrix-like world editor, which looks pretty freaking cool in my estimation. There was also a decent amount of effort put into the graphic aspect of the user experience. The UI is polished and lean, even if the functional aspects of the user experience itself is less than stellar. Oddly enough, despite the fact that NPCs in this game are meant to be people who play different games and have the possibility of choosing between several different in-game avatars for each game, they look very extremely same-ish. With some notable exceptions, they look like these little cardboard figures you used to dress with different little paper dresses when you were little. The game ships with an art book, and I'd say that we got the best version of everything, especially your apartment. Overall, I'd say it's pretty good. Performance and stability. It crashed 3 or 4 times. There was this time in which I couldn't continue because the continue button wasn't clickable. Many times I got a line of code that was missing the opening bracket instead of the actual value of the token I was supposed to get. like my character's gender or title, and there was this untranslated polished text line that popped up during both of my playthroughs. And yeah, rozumiem. This all made Gamedec feel rushed and unpolished, even if it's a polish game. See what I did there? No? Okay. Perhaps all this funneling we get story-wise near the end is meant to be the product of the inevitability that comes from the fact that you're inside a matrix that has been designed by someone else. But all these bugs and glitches, in addition to those subplots and characters that go nowhere, make it feel like just another sign that this is just an underdeveloped game. And that is a pity. Other considerations and final thoughts. So a few weeks ago I reviewed Encased. I was not crazy about it, and I gave it a 6 out of 10. And it seems like they were much too worried about offending anyone, or being too difficult, or being too controversial, or being too anything really. It felt like they were all hell-bent on not displeasing anyone, rather than making their best effort to be something special to someone. Gamedec is probably the opposite story in many respects, but it is so undercooked that it fails to latch on to the greatness it was meant to. And that truly is a pity, because the bones are there, and they are fascinating. I am constantly fishing for games that tell good stories and provide you with branching paths that stem out of decision nodes. And while Gamedec is just that in theory, I don't think it is a game I will be recommending to everyone. It could have been an episode of Ye Old Gamer Recommends, but unfortunately, while I liked it quite a lot, I admit, I can only recommend Gamedec to you if you're one of those people who always look under the hood of the story, and only if you're the forgiving type. The very forgiving type. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you're seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming. But don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.